Hey, come on in. Get comfortable. Grab whatever it is you keep close when you settle in for something long. The blanket that's a little too warm for this time of year, the drink that's gone slightly cold because you kept meaning to sip it and didn't. Pull up wherever you are, dim the lights if you haven't. You don't need to be anywhere else tonight because tonight we're going back to Gravity Falls. Not the version you remember from the first time, the loud, funny, exciting version where you were just trying to keep up with the plot. No. Tonight we're going back slower, quieter. We're going to sit with the stories that live underneath the show's surface, the ones that don't announce themselves with dramatic music cues or big reveal moments, the ones you have to earn by paying attention, or by coming back when you're older, or by sitting still long enough to feel their weight. There are 10 of them tonight. 10 hidden stories from a show that was always telling you more than you thought it was. Some of them are sad, some of them are strange. Some of them are the kind of thing that makes you put the episode on pause and just sit in the quiet for a second while you work out what you just absorbed. But all of them are worth knowing. All of them make this world feel a little more alive, a little more true, a little more worth coming back to. So, wherever you are right now, if you're in bed with the lights off, if you're at your desk winding down, if you're somewhere far from home and you needed something familiar and warm, welcome back to the woods. Let's begin. If you want to be part of this little community, now drop a comment below and let me know the time and place you're watching from. Doesn't matter if it's 2 a.m. in your childhood bedroom or noon in an airport terminal. I love knowing where these videos find you. And if you haven't subscribed yet, the button is right there. It's free, it keeps the pine trees lit, and it genuinely means everything. Story 1. The secret Stan carried for 30 years. Let's start with the one that was hiding in plain sight from the very first episode. Because Stan Pines is one of the most brilliantly constructed characters in modern animation, and the reason he works, the reason he hits so hard when the truth finally comes out, is that every single thing he did for those first 30 episodes was built on a lie that was all somehow an act of pure love. Here is what we know, and here is how Alex Hirsch hit it. From the moment we meet Grunkle Stan in Tourist Trapped, the very first episode, he's coded as a particular kind of person. He's the lovable grifter uncle, the guy who runs a tourist trap selling fake mystery attractions to gullible visitors, who is clearly not above a little deception to make a buck. He's funny. He's warm in his own gruff way. And he has a secret room behind a vending machine that he disappears into sometimes when nobody's watching. The show presents that detail as a small quirk, a little piece of atmosphere, a hint that maybe there's more going on. And then it just moves on. It plants the seed and walks away. Over the course of the first season, you might accumulate a vague unease about Stan. There's the box of fake IDs. The fact that he's been banned from at least 32 states across America. The way he reacts when Dipper discovers Journal 3, the show tells us Stan feigns disbelief in its contents, which is such a carefully chosen phrase. He doesn't simply not believe it. He performs not believing it. That distinction matters enormously in retrospect. And then there's the cryptogram that flashes at the end of the very first episode's closing credits. If you pause at exactly the right moment and decode it using a Caesar cipher with a shift of 3, it reads, "Stan is not what he seems." That message sat there in the opening credits of every single episode of Season 1. Every single week, right there in the closing seconds of the theme song. The answer was always available. The show was never hiding the lie. It was hiding it in plain sight, which is a completely different thing and somehow much more haunting. But here's the story that most people don't feel the full weight of until they sit with it. Stan Pines was not lying because he was a criminal hiding from the law, though that's technically true. He was not lying because he enjoyed the deception, though he was certainly good at it. He was lying because he had made a mistake 30 years before that sent his brother Ford tumbling through an interdimensional portal, and he had spent every single night since then trying to fix it. The real story begins decades before the series, in Glass Shard Beach, New Jersey, which is exactly as bleak a name for a childhood hometown as it sounds. The Pines family was not exactly the picture of warm domestic stability. Their father, Philbrick, voiced with exactly the right level of quiet menace by Jonathan Banks, was the kind of man who viewed his sons as investments rather than children. Ford, the genius twin with 6 fingers on each hand and a mind that could solve problems no one else could even articulate, was the investment with the highest projected return. Stan, the other one, the funny one, the scrappy one, the one who struggled in school but could talk his way into or out of anything, was the one their father called a lost cause, loudly enough that Stan could hear it through the closed door of the principal's office. These boys were best friends despite all of that, maybe because of all of that. They had a boat they were going to fix up together, a childhood dream of sailing around the world and finding adventure. And they had a handshake they'd invented as kids, a high six, both of them pressing all 12 fingers together. It was their thing. It was the physical shorthand for everything they were to each other. And then one night, during a fight, Stan accidentally knocked Ford's science fair project, a perpetual motion machine that had earned Ford a full scholarship to his dream university, off its stand and destroyed it. Not on purpose. In anger, yes, but not deliberately. Stan slammed his fist on the table and the machine fell and broke. And in the morning, when the college recruiters came and saw the damaged device, they rescinded Ford's admission. And their father, unable to contain his fury and his disappointment and his brutal pragmatism, told Stan to get out and never come back. Stan was 17 years old. Said he spent the next several years doing what he'd always been good at, which was surviving, scamming, moving from state to state, staying a step ahead of consequences, reinventing himself with new names and new schemes in a box of fake identities that grew heavier with each passing year. He and Ford had one phone call years later that ended badly. The estrangement calcified. Two brothers who had been inseparable at 16 became strangers who happened to share a last name. Then Ford sent a letter. "Come to Gravity Falls. There's something I need to tell you." And Stan went. Of course he went, because whatever else he'd done, whatever other versions of himself he'd constructed across all those years and all those states, the version underneath all of them was still the boy who loved his brother and still hadn't forgiven himself for the night the machine fell. What he found in Gravity Falls was not reconciliation. Ford had summoned him not to make peace, but to ask him to take one of the journals and run, to disappear with it because the machine Ford had built, the interdimensional portal in the basement of the Mystery Shack, was too dangerous to leave intact and needed its components scattered to the winds. And Stan, who had come all the way across the country hoping for the reunion he'd been playing out in his head since he was 17, was furious. They fought. The portal activated, and Ford went through it. Just like that. In a moment. In a breath. 1 second Ford was there, and then he was gone. Oh, and the silence in the basement of that forest lab was the loudest thing Stan had ever heard. What Stan did next is the part that doesn't quite fit a man defined by selfishness. He could have left. He had a car and a full tank of gas and 30 years of practice at starting over. He could have driven away from that basement and never looked back, and the world would never have known the difference, but he didn't leave. He assumed his brother's identity instead. He told the town he was Stanford Pines, the eccentric researcher who lived in the woods. He faked Stanley Pine's death in a car crash to explain why that version of him would never be heard from again. He turned his brother's lab and house into a tourist trap to pay the mortgage and keep the lights on. And then every single night for 30 years, he went down into the basement and worked on the portal, trying to figure out how to bring his brother back. 30 years. He didn't know if Ford was alive or dead. He didn't know if the portal could even be reversed. He had no scientific training, no journals to guide him. He'd had to find journals 1 and 2 over the course of the series before he had enough information to complete the sequence. And yet he kept going. Night after night, year after year, in the basement under the vending machine, a man who everyone in his life, including his family, including the niece and nephew he would grow to love, had been told was someone else entirely. When Dipper and Mabel's parents sent them to Gravity Falls for the summer, they were not sending them to Stanford Pines, the genius researcher. They were sending them to Stanley Pines, the con man, who was currently living under his brother's name and working on a machine that could theoretically destroy the world if activated incorrectly, and who every night was doing exactly that while his great niece and nephew slept upstairs. And the thing is, you can watch the entire first season again with that knowledge and see Stan's love for those kids written into every scene. The way he argues with them and tests them and grumbles at them, and then in the quiet moments does exactly the right thing. the thing that a father would do. He was never supposed to be a parent. He'd been told since he was 17 that he was a screw-up who would amount to nothing. And here he was, alone in his dead brother's house, being a family to two children who didn't know his real name. But when the truth finally comes out and not what he seems in A Tale of Two Stans, and Mabel has to decide whether to believe in Stan when she has every reason in the world not to. The moment lands so hard because of all the slow, quiet work the show has been doing for 30 episodes. Stan didn't ask for her trust. He asked for her faith. And the reason she gives it to him, the reason it feels true rather than sentimental, is because we've seen what he is underneath all the deception. He is still the boy with the boat. He is still the one who went back. The character arc ends with Stan sacrificing his memories to defeat Bill, his mind wiped clean so that the family he loves can live. Ford begins to erase his twin's consciousness with the memory gun, and Stan tells him it's okay. He makes one last joke. That's the kind of joke Stan Pines has been making his whole life to hide the things he actually feels. And then he's gone. His memories come back, slowly, when Mabel shows him her scrapbook. The summer he couldn't remember, laid out in glitter and photographs and handwritten captions, given back to him by the 12-year-old who chose to believe in him on the worst night either of them had ever had. If you've seen the show and you've forgotten how that scene makes you feel, go back and watch it. Sit with it. Let it do what it does. Stan Pines carried that secret for 30 years. Every episode you ever watched him in, he was carrying it. And it was love the whole time. Now let's go deeper on something the show never says directly, but shows you in pieces scattered across 2 seasons. But because the story of what Stan did between the night Ford went through the portal and the night he came back out of it is almost more remarkable than the original sacrifice. Stan was not trained for what he spent 30 years doing. He had no scientific background. He had a box of fake IDs and a lifetime of experience in petty crime, and a grief he had no language for, and a determination that he would not have described as loyalty because Stan Pines does not use words like loyalty about himself. He would have called it stubbornness, maybe? Or stupidity. But what it was, functionally, was the most sustained and consequential act of love in the show. He had one of the 3 journals. Ford had given it to him, told him to run with it, but he didn't run. He stayed. And he opened the journal and he began to try to understand what it said. Think about what that meant. Journal 1, written by a theoretical physicist and interdimensional researcher, documented in the technical language of someone with a doctoral degree and 6 years of specialized research experience, was Stan Pines' primary source document for the reconstruction of a machine he had no training to build. He had been described since childhood by his own father as the dumb one. He had barely graduated high school. He had spent his adult life in scams that required quick thinking and social manipulation, rather than technical problem solving. And here he was, alone in a forest in Oregon, reading dense scientific notation by lamplight, trying to reconstruct a portal to another dimension, one piece at a time because his brother was somewhere on the other side of it, and Stan Pines did not know how to stop. But he needed the other 2 journals to complete the sequence, and he didn't have them. Ford had hidden Journal 3 before the fight. It was the one Dipper would eventually find in the forest, the one that started everything. And Journal 2 was somewhere else entirely. Stan spent years looking for both of them, gathering information wherever he could, trying to understand the portal's principles well enough to make progress without the full documentation. He made some progress. He also, along the way, accidentally burned the house down and had to rebuild it. He also nearly activated the portal at dangerous levels several times, which explains the radioactive waste that government agents Powers and Trigger would eventually find in Not What He Seems and interpret as evidence of a doomsday device. It was not a doomsday device. It was a rescue operation being run by a man who didn't know what he was doing it anyway, every night, for 30 years. In the first episode of the show, there's a moment very late in the action where Stan disappears behind the vending machine in the Mystery Shack. Dipper notices. He makes a note of it. The show moves on. But if you go back to that moment with everything you know, Stan Pines is going downstairs to work on the machine. It is summer, which means he has 2 children sleeping upstairs who don't know his real name. He has a tourist trap to run in the morning. He has this entire architecture of lies to maintain, and it costs him something every single day. And after all of that, he goes downstairs and he works on bringing his brother home. But the thing that makes this story so specifically aching is that Stan expected nothing. He did not tell himself a story in which Ford came back and recognized what Stan had done and forgave him everything, and the brothers were made whole again. That story would have required Ford to be a different kind of person than he was, and Stan knew his brother. He knew exactly what kind of reunion was waiting for him if the portal ever worked. Ford, emerging confused and disoriented and 30 years out of time, furious at what Stan had done with his name and his house and his life. Stan knew this. He did it anyway. Ford punches him when he comes through the portal. First thing, before thanks, before words, before anything. He punches him. And Stan doesn't blame him for it. He takes it. He says, "Welcome back." The siblings' relationship for the rest of Season 2 is complicated and genuinely difficult, the way that real estrangements are when they try to heal. Ford is not ready to forgive. Stan is not ready to stop feeling guilty. They have 30 years of silence between them, and each of them carries a version of the story in which the other one bears more of the responsibility. Neither version is entirely false. Neither version is entirely true. They are two men who loved each other when they were young and hurt each other without meaning to, and then spent 3 decades unable to find the way back. And now the way back is sitting right in front of them, and they're not sure they know how to walk it. There is a moment near the end, during the climax of Weirdmageddon, when they are imprisoned together in Bill's pyramid and genuinely believe they are about to die, when Stan and Ford talk. Really talk. Stan says the thing he's been carrying since he was 17, that he's a screw-up, that his father was right, that he couldn't even shake Ford's stupid hand when they needed to work together, and now maybe it's going to cost them everything. And Ford tells him the truth, that the only reason Bill got to Ford in the first place is that Ford fell for his flattery and his manipulation in exactly the way that Stan, street smart, con man savvy, able to recognize a grifter from 3 rooms away, would never have fallen for. That it wasn't Stan's intelligence that failed, that Stan's particular brand of wisdom might have been the only thing that could have stopped it had Stan been there. Stan built the most important survival skill. He just built it in the wrong direction for 30 years. The ending gives them the boat. The Stan War II, restored, named after the dream they had when they were 17, 2 old men on the ocean, chasing anomalies the way they said they would when they were teenagers before everything went wrong. The world didn't give them back what they lost. It never does. And the show knows better than to pretend otherwise, but it gave them the time they have left, and it gave them the choice to spend it together, and that is enough. That, the show gently argues, is more than enough. That is everything. Stan Pines carried that secret for 30 years, did the impossible thing every night, expected nothing good to come from it, and got his brother back anyway. At every episode you ever watched him in, he was carrying it. And it was love the whole time. Story 2. The Demon Who Chose Ford. Here is something that the show tells you once, quietly, and then lets sit. When Bill Cipher first appeared to Stanford Pines, the real Stanford, the genius with 6 fingers, deep in the Gravity Falls forest, 6 years into his research and stuck at a wall he couldn't find a way around. Bill did not arrive with fire and threats and the promise of suffering. He arrived as a gift. He introduced himself as a muse. That framing is worth staying with for a moment because it tells you everything about how Bill operates and why he's so genuinely frightening as a villain. He didn't offer Ford power. He didn't offer him knowledge in some obvious, demonic bargain basement way. He offered him inspiration. That he told Ford that he chose one brilliant mind per century to work with. That Ford was the special one, the exceptional one, the one worth choosing. And Ford, isolated in his forest research lab, estranged from his brother, convinced since childhood that his worth was entirely contained in his intellect and his uniqueness, believed him. Bill recognized Ford's brilliant but cocky and insecure nature and his near friendlessness as ideal conditions for manipulation. That's not fan speculation. That's the show's own phrasing from the Gravity Falls Wikia documentation of canon material. Bill is not described as a demon who stumbled onto a convenient target. He is described as a predator who understood his prey and chose accordingly. He looked at Stanford Pines and saw everything he needed. A brilliant man who was deeply alone, who had been told his whole life that his exceptionalism made him different from other people, who had spent years in a forest essentially talking to the walls, and who would do almost anything to have someone in his corner who truly understood what he was capable of. Bill became that someone. According to Journal 3 and the various expanded canon materials Alex Hirsch has released over the years, their working relationship was close in a way that went beyond simple intellectual partnership. Bill helped Ford with his research. He appeared in Ford's dreams and gave him calculations that turned out to be perfectly correct. He spent time in Ford's mind with Ford's permission because Ford trusted him completely and had essentially given him a standing invitation. There's a note in Journal 3 where Ford writes about waking up to find 6 hours of beautiful calculations on his desk, work that Bill had done while Ford slept so that they could stay on schedule, and Ford describes himself as being unable to contain his smile. Let that sit for a moment. Ford pines, paranoid, isolated, the man who would eventually take every precaution imaginable against supernatural threats and write cautionary warnings about Bill Cipher in all 3 of his journals, was unable to contain his smile because of something Bill did for him. Because someone had stayed up working while he rested. Because someone had his back. It was all a manipulation, of course. Bill needed Ford to complete the interdimensional portal because the portal was his path out of the nightmare realm and into the physical world. And Ford's brain was the tool he needed to do it. Every piece of flattery, every calculation left on the desk, every hour spent as Ford's trusted confidant was in service of that goal. But the Book of Bill, the 2024 adult-oriented companion book written by Alex Hirsch from Bill's perspective, adds something complicated to this picture. It suggests that despite everything, despite all the calculation and predation, something in Bill's connection to Ford was genuine in its own twisted way. Bill describes Ford as exceptional, as someone he came to truly value, and the book depicts Bill after Ford rejects him, getting spectacularly, pathetically drunk in a bar somewhere in the asteroid belt, ordering something called 1-6er, his nickname for Ford, and destroying the place when he's refused. The Book of Bill has Bill crying over Ford's rejection. This is the same entity who destroyed his own home dimension, who tortured Ford physically during Weirdmageddon, who tried to fold the entirety of reality into chaos for his own amusement. And after the defeat, he goes to a bar and cries because he misses his 6er. Mabel, in a note she writes to the reader in the Book of Bill, observes that Bill seems like a super needy ex who needs to work on getting over Ford. She says this like it's funny, and it is funny, but it's also genuinely unsettling if you think about what it means. The most dangerous being who ever threatened their world was, on some level, lonely. Was, on some level, doing what lonely and manipulative people do. Finding the person most vulnerable to their particular kind of attention, and attaching to them in a way that looked like care but functioned like possession. Ford's experience with Bill is one of the clearest depictions of a specific kind of emotional abuse in children's animation. The grooming stages are all there, presented accurately, and without the show making a big deal about it. First, there's the flattery, the appeal to uniqueness, the special 1-per-century mythology Bill constructs to explain his attention. Then there's the isolation. Bill gradually works on Ford's trust in McGucket, Ford's only real friend during this period, undermining the friendship until Ford is more reliant on Bill than on anyone human. Then there's the dependency. Bill becomes so integrated into Ford's work and his daily life that Ford cannot imagine the project without him. And finally, when Ford discovers the truth, when he learns that the portal wasn't a scientific achievement, but a doorway Bill needed him to build so he could escape into the world and destroy it, the revelation doesn't feel like learning an enemy's plan, it feels like a betrayal. Ford writes in Journal 3 after discovering the truth, "This nightmare in disguise will seduce you with never-ending flattery until he gets what he wants." He writes it as a warning for whoever might read the journals after him, but it reads like something written by someone who needed to name what happened to them before they could move on from it. The thing about Ford and Bill is that the story doesn't end with Ford walking away clean and wiser. For the rest of the show, Ford carries Bill with him. He is the most prepared of anyone for what Bill represents, and he still almost loses. When Bill actually arrives in physical form during Weirdmageddon, his first move is to turn Ford into a golden statue, because of course it is. Ford is the one person who truly understands the threat, and Bill knows it. Later, chained in the pyramid, Bill tries every approach on Ford that has ever worked before. He offers power. He tries charm. He physically tortures him. He even sings, which is deeply strange and deeply on brand. A few bars of We'll Meet Again by Vera Lynn, while Ford hangs in chains in a pyramid made of frozen screaming people. Ford doesn't break. What he's learned, all those years ago in the forest, is something the show never quite says aloud but makes you feel in your bones. The person most likely to be targeted by a manipulator is not the stupid person. It's the brilliant, isolated, insecure one who wants desperately to be seen and has no one close enough to see through the performance. Ford survived Bill not because he was smart enough, he was already smart when Bill got him, but because he'd had 30 years to sit with what happened, understand it, and choose not to let it define him. He still goes on the boat at the end. He still finds his way back to his brother. Bill chose Ford, and it nearly destroyed him. But it didn't. That matters more than the rest of it. Story 3, Fiddleford McGucket, the man who erased himself. If you watched Gravity Falls as a kid, you probably remember Old Man McGucket as the funny, crazy person. The hillbilly who lived in the junkyard and talked in nonsense rhymes and chased chickens. He was a bit character in a dozen early episodes, a recurring background joke, the local eccentric who added texture to the town without demanding too much attention. He was not in those early episodes a character you thought very hard about. That's the thing Alex Hirsch knew perfectly well. He built McGucket as a figure of comedy first, knowing that when the truth came out, the distance between who we thought McGucket was and who he actually had been would do all the emotional heavy lifting on its own. Fiddleford Hadron McGucket was, before everything, a genius. Not in the vague, generalized way that shows sometimes describe secondary characters. He was specifically, demonstrably, technically gifted. He founded his own personal computer company in the mid-1970s, back when personal computers barely existed, in a place called Palo Alto, California, and named it Fiddleford Computermajigs. The name is funny. The accomplishment is not. He was doing this work in the mid-1970s, which puts him in the same historical neighborhood as the actual founders of Apple and Microsoft. He was that kind of person. He and Ford Pines met at Backups University. The unflattering name Ford had to attend after Stan accidentally destroyed his chance at West Coast Tech, where Ford recognized in McGucket a young but brilliant mechanic. They became friends, which is significant because Ford was not particularly good at friendship and came to Gravity Falls together to work on the Portal project. McGucket was the engineer. Ford was the theorist. Together, they were the team that might actually be able to build a working interdimensional gateway. And then something went wrong. McGucket was partially sucked into the portal during an early test run. He came back out, physically intact, but he'd seen something on the other side, or heard something, or felt something that had no name in any language available to a human mind in the 1970s in rural Oregon. He came back babbling, terrified, speaking in a pattern that we, the audience, would recognize years later as something connected to Bill Cipher. When gravity falls and Earth becomes sky, fear the beast with just one eye. And he told Ford they had to stop. Ford refused. McGucket quit the project and went home. But he was not able to leave behind what he'd experienced. The memories followed him. Paranoia set in. Insomnia. The kind of raw animal terror that doesn't respond to logic because the thing it's afraid of was never quite rational in the first place. He found himself unable to sleep, unable to work, unable to think around the images that kept surfacing from the moment he'd spent inside the portal. So he built a device, a memory-erasing gun, a tool that could isolate a specific memory, extract it cleanly, encapsulate it in a small glass vial, and send it away through a pneumatic tube to somewhere it wouldn't bother you anymore. He used it on himself first, one targeted removal. The memories of the portal gone. He slept. He functioned. He felt for a short while like himself again. And then the other memories began to press in, what he'd seen, what he'd heard, what he suspected Ford was still doing down in that basement. That he used the gun again, and again. And then on things that weren't quite memories of the portal anymore. Regular fears, regular griefs, the ordinary accumulation of pain that a human life carries. McGucket had discovered that forgetting felt like relief, and forgetting was available to him. and the distance between using the gun and needing to use the gun again shrank with every use. He founded the Society of the Blind Eye as a way to extend this service to others. Gravity Falls was, objectively, a town with an unusually high rate of supernatural encounters, gnomes and monsters, and things that came out of the woods that had no reasonable explanation. Normal people were having their lives disrupted by experiences they couldn't process, couldn't talk about, couldn't integrate. But McGucket's solution was practical in its way. He could take those experiences away. He could give the people of Gravity Falls the gift of not having to carry the impossible things they had witnessed. The Society's motto was Novus Ordo Seclorum, a Latin phrase meaning New Order of the Ages, the same text visible on the back of an American $1 bill. The knowledge is all around you, the Society seemed to believe, and the best thing for everyone is simply not to look at it. What McGucket didn't account for, or perhaps chose not to account for, given that accounting for consequences was exactly the kind of cognitive work the gun was preventing him from doing, was the cumulative effect of the erasures on his own mind. The brain is not a filing cabinet from which individual drawers can be cleanly removed. The experiences we accumulate are woven together, each one connected to a dozen others through association and context, and the way memories reference each other as they form. When you begin surgically removing threads from that web, the structure around the holes begins to loosen. After enough uses, and McGucket used the gun on himself not dozens but hundreds of times over the years, the loosening became collapse. Skills disappeared. Language began to fragment. The sophisticated, brilliant mechanic who had invented personal computers in the 1970s forgot words, forgot processes, forgot the chain of logic that had once let him build anything he could imagine. The Society's own membership eventually forgot who had founded it. There is something almost unbearably sad about that detail. McGucket used the device so much that he erased the memory of having created it, which meant that when Dipper and the others eventually found the Hall of the Forgotten, McGucket's memory tube was stored in a place of honor among the collection. Not because anyone who was still working for the Society remembered why he mattered, but because the tube's placement had been determined before anyone's memory of him had been erased, and nobody had ever moved it. He'd left himself a place of honor in a room nobody could explain anymore. The episode Society of the Blind Eye, which reveals all of this, has a moment when McGucket finally recovers his memory tube and watches what's inside by a video recording of himself at his most brilliant, confident, and competent at explaining what he knows and who he is. He watches himself on that screen and doesn't recognize the man he's looking at. The gap between who McGucket was and who the gun left behind is vast enough that his own past self reads as a stranger. And then he says something. He says that he's glad to have his memories back, even the painful ones, because you can't move toward your future if you've spent all your energy running from your past. Mabel takes the same lesson home. She'd been considering using the gun on herself to forget all the failed crushes of her summer, the string of boys who'd hurt her feelings or let her down or simply not been right. The machine was right there. The forgetting was available. And she chose not to. Because McGucket showed her what forgetting costs. That the show ends with McGucket buying Northwest Manor, after Pacifica's family loses it, and turning it into McGucket's Hootenanny Hut, which is arguably the most joyful thing in all of Weirdmageddon. He recovers. He reconnects with his son. He rebuilds something like himself from the pieces that were left. It is not a perfect healing, some of what the gun took may never come back, but it is the kind of recovery that happens in the real world, which is to say it is partial and imperfect and genuinely miraculous. There's a theory about McGucket that floats around the fandom that has never been officially confirmed, but feels true in the way that good theories feel true. That the reason he survived all those years of deterioration, why he maintained even a fragment of himself through all of it, is that the things the gun couldn't seem to erase were the simple joys. Music, laughter, animals, the particular pleasure of building something with your hands. The things McGucket had loved longest and purest were the things that held on longest. The memory gun could take the knowledge, but it couldn't quite reach the warmth. That's either a beautiful detail hidden in the show's design or a beautiful detail hiding in the human condition. Either way, it's there. There's a thread in McGucket's story that runs all the way back to his friendship with Ford that the show only hints at but that fills in a crucial gap. When Ford arrived at Backup University, the backup school, the consolation prize, he was the eccentric outsider with the extra fingers. That's the kid who had been dismissed by the one institution that was supposed to recognize what he was worth. He arrived carrying that humiliation and that hunger to prove himself, and McGucket was the one who saw past all of that and just liked him. Liked him the way that an honest person likes another honest person. Because they were both genuinely interested in the same things, because they were both weird in compatible ways, because there is a specific chemistry between two people who understand the world through the same lens even when everything else about them is different. Their partnership at the portal was real. McGucket was not a disposable assistant or a hired technician. He was the person who made the project possible in practical terms, who knew how to build what Ford could only theorize about, and who brought the physical reality of the machine into being from what lived only in Ford's equations. The portal would not have existed without Fiddleford McGucket, and it was his encounter with what was on the other side of that portal, whatever he saw or heard or felt in the fraction of time he spent halfway through it before Ford pulled him back, that set everything in motion. The society, the memory gun, the 30 years of gradual deterioration, the eccentric hillbilly persona, the jokes that were armor. All of it traces back to one moment inside a machine he'd helped to build when something on the other side looked back. What did he see? The show leaves it deliberately ambiguous, which is the right call. The specificity would make it smaller. By what we know is the aftermath, that it was bad enough to break a brilliant and resilient man's relationship with his own mind, bad enough that he invented an entire technology and founded an entire organization to manage the damage. Whatever it was a weight that ordinary people don't get asked to carry. Ford wrote about the society in his journal, after he discovered what McGucket had built. If my suspicions are correct, this is the work of Fiddleford. Does he really have to go to such great lengths to forget? That question, does he really have to go to such great lengths, reads very differently once you understand what McGucket was trying to forget and why he had to go to such lengths to forget it. Ford was the one who chose not to listen when McGucket said stop. Ford was the one who kept pushing the project forward while his only friend was coming apart at the seams. And Ford, recognizing this later, wrote it in his journal, not as an accusation, but as a genuine question. As if even after everything, he couldn't fully comprehend the scale of what he'd failed to protect McGucket from. The friendship between Ford and McGucket ends in the episode Society of the Blind Eye when McGucket, his memories finally restored, crosses the floor to Ford and forgives him. During Weirdmageddon, McGucket is one of the people who fights back. He designs weapons from junkyard parts with a competence that shows you clearly what kind of mind is still in there underneath everything the gun took. He is still somewhere inside Fiddleford Hadron McGucket, the inventor. The gun dimmed that, smeared it, scattered it across years of damage. It didn't erase it. The show ending with McGucket buying the Northwest Manor and turning it into a place for hootenannies and good times is exactly right. It is the right ending for this specific character. Not a return to what he was, that's gone, but something new built from what survived. And what survived was the music and the laughter and the animals and the joy of building something and seeing it work. The warmth that the gun couldn't reach. There's a quiet detail in the show that very few people catch. In Weirdmageddon, when McGucket is fighting back with his homemade weapons, that he makes a device that shoots out a spinning mechanism. And the specific mechanical solution he uses is exactly the kind of thing you'd expect from someone who once built personal computers in the mid-1970s out of nothing. The skills aren't gone, they went underground, and under pressure, when it mattered most, they came back up. That's either a beautiful detail hidden in the show's design or a beautiful detail hiding in the human condition. Either way, it's there. Story 4. The Society of the Blind Eye. Forgetting was their religion. Let's slow down and sit inside the Society of the Blind Eye as a concept for a while because it's one of the most quietly sophisticated ideas in the entire show, and it tends to get summarized in ways that flatten it. On the surface, the Society of the Blind Eye is a villain of the week organization in a second season episode. They wear robes. They have a secret hideout under the Gravity Falls Museum of History, accessed through a fireplace hidden among an exhibit of eye sculptures, which is a lovely bit of visual irony. They have a memory-erasing gun. They abduct townsfolk who have witnessed supernatural events and erase the relevant memories, sending the extracted recollections through pneumatic tubes into a chamber, called the Hall of the Forgotten. They are, on first pass, a fairly efficient Monster of the Week obstacle. But look at what the society actually is when you step back. They are a group of ordinary people. Toby Determined, the town's bumbling newspaper reporter. Bud Gleeful, Little Gideon's father and used car salesman. The Woodpecker Guy, a few others, who had their own encounters with the supernatural in Gravity Falls, found those encounters unbearable, and sought a technological solution to the problem of having to live with knowledge that has no comfortable place in the world you thought you inhabited. That's not a supervillain's motivation. That's a coping mechanism. Gravity Falls is a town where impossible things happen constantly, and the town has been living with that reality since long before Dipper and Mabel arrived. The gnomes tried to steal someone's pie this week. Last week something came out of the lake. The week before that, a ghost moved through the school. There is no framework in most people's daily lives for processing that kind of thing. There is no support group. There is no official acknowledgement. There is only the experience itself, sitting in your chest like something swallowed wrong, and the knowledge that if you tell anyone what you saw, they will look at you exactly the way people look at Old Man McGucket. The society offered an alternative. You don't have to carry it. You don't have to explain it. You can simply not have the memory at all, and when you wake up tomorrow, you will be the person you were before the encounter, and the world will be the size it was before. Blind Ivan, the society's leader at the time Dipper and the group discover it, is not a monster. He's a man who found something that worked for him and built an institution around it. The society's chant before each erasure, Novus Ordo Seclorum, New Order of the Ages, suggests that they understood what they were doing as a kind of mission rather than a crime. They were not taking something from people. They were offering or imposing a cleaned-up world. They were the architects of a kind of innocence. The horror of it is not that they were cruel. The horror of it is that they were sincere. There are a few details in the Society's Hall of the Forgotten that the show mentions briefly and then doesn't linger on. Details that reward attention. One memory tube in the hall is labeled Jeffrey Canuck, a character name that never appears anywhere else in the show, suggesting a person whose encounter with the supernatural was significant enough to merit the Society's attention, but whose story we will never know. Another tube is labeled next to the ones belonging to McGucket and Preston Northwest, which suggests that Gravity Falls' richest and most powerful man also had memories of the supernatural that he'd had removed. The walls of the hall are lined with tubes, each one a memory that was taken from someone who decided, or was decided for, that they couldn't be allowed to know what they knew. The episode's credits Cipher decodes to, "Ignorance is bliss, but bliss is boring." It's one of the wittiest and most pointed cryptograms in the show's run. Consider what the show is actually saying with all of this. The Society has been operating in Gravity Falls for decades. The Blind Eye Society's memory erasures explain why the town's residents so often seem to reset back to their baseline behaviors between episodes. Why Robbie is still antagonistic toward Dipper even after the episode where they came close to genuine understanding. So why various characters seem to not quite retain the lessons that their encounters with the supernatural should have taught them. They were being reset? Literally. The Society was visiting after significant encounters and removing the relevant memories, leaving the people of Gravity Falls able to continue their lives without the burden of impossible knowledge. It is, in a way, a mercy. It is also a trap. A town full of people who are incapable of learning from their experiences because their experiences keep being taken from them is a town that can never actually grow. And that stasis, that inability to integrate and evolve, is exactly what made Gravity Falls so vulnerable when Weirdmageddon came. The people of the town had been kept in a state of managed ignorance for so long that when something genuinely apocalyptic arrived, they had no framework for resistance, no accumulated wisdom about the supernatural, no shared understanding of what they were facing. The Society of the Blind Eye thought it was protecting the town. It was actually hollowing it out. There is one more thing worth noting about the Society, and it is this. When Dipper finally defeats the Society's current members by turning the memory gun on them, erasing their recollections of their own organization, the members who get their minds wiped already had lives outside the Society. Toby, determined, still has his newspaper. The others have their jobs and homes and families. They are going to be fine, or at least no worse than before, because the society was something they did on the side of whoever they actually were. But Blind Ivan, the leader, the true believer, well, if the man who had made the society his entire identity is left with nothing, his personality, his sense of purpose, his connection to other people, all of it lived inside the society. When it's taken away, he becomes a blank slate. Mabel, who cannot resist the impulse to make things slightly better, gives him a new identity on the spot, and he accepts it immediately because there is no longer any prior version of himself left to contradict it. It is the loneliest possible ending for a character the show barely bothered to make you care about. And it lingers, the way the best loneliness always does, long after the episode has moved on. There is one more element of the Blind Eye Society that doesn't get talked about enough, and it's this: the physical location of their headquarters. How they operate underneath the Gravity Falls Museum of History. Their entrance is concealed by a fireplace in a room full of eye sculptures. Their pneumatic tube system for storing memories runs underneath the town's official repository of its own past. The Society of the Blind Eye stores what the town refuses to know directly beneath the building where the town keeps what it chooses to remember. The official history on one level. The suppressed experience directly underneath it. There's something deeply satisfying about that piece of architecture, if you think about it as a piece of deliberate design rather than a convenient plot necessity. But the show is saying something about how institutions work, about how any community's official story sits on top of a much larger body of things that couldn't be integrated into that story and were therefore hidden. History is the acceptable layer. The Hall of the Forgotten is what's underneath it, labeled and organized and real, waiting for whoever comes looking with the right tools. When Dipper discovers the hall and they're pulling memory tubes and reading labels, the names of ordinary Gravity Falls residents beside the description of what they'd been made to forget. It feels like excavation, like the scene is doing something slightly different from what the plot requires. It feels like the show saying, this is always here. In every place where people live together and make stories about who they are and what happened to them, this is always here underneath. The things that didn't fit, the things that were too strange, too painful, too disruptive to the story the community needed to tell about itself. And the reason the society was ultimately necessary to disband was not just because their methods were harmful and their consent record was appalling. It was because a community that cannot remember its full experience cannot grow from it. A town that has had its supernatural encounters systematically removed is a town without the accumulated wisdom those encounters would have built. When Weirdmageddon came, Gravity Falls had no institutional memory of how to handle the impossible, because the society had been erasing exactly that for 30 years. Forgetting is not neutral. It has a cost. And sometimes, often, the cost is paid by everyone, not just the person who chose to forget. Story 5. Pacifica Northwest and the Bell. Here's something that lands differently if you watch Gravity Falls for the first time as a child versus watching it again as an adult who has had some time to understand what the word conditioning means in a psychological context. When Pacifica Northwest appears in Northwest Mansion Mystery, the 10th episode of the second season, the one directed by future Amphibia creator Matt Brawley, her parents want her to come to the panic room and avoid the ghost. Her father rings a bell, and Pacifica, visibly struggling against herself, physically unable at first to disobey, freezes in place and begins to move toward the panic room, even though she doesn't want to. When you watch it as a child, you probably think, that's a funny gag, she's trained like a dog. But when you watch it as an adult, you feel something cold and specific, because you know what you're looking at. Pavlovian behavioral conditioning is when you associate a neutral stimulus, a bell in this case, with a consequence, until the subject begins to produce the associated response automatically upon hearing the stimulus, without conscious thought. It works on dogs. It works on humans too, particularly when applied to children by parents who have the authority and the access and the willingness to do it consistently enough, over enough years, that the response becomes reflexive. When Preston Northwest rings that bell, Pacifica doesn't think, I should obey my father. She just moves. Her body acts before her mind can intervene. That is not a cartoon exaggeration. That is an accurate depiction of what systematic psychological conditioning of a child looks like from the inside. The show never says this out loud. It doesn't editorialize. It shows it, lets it sit, and trusts you to understand what you're seeing. The Pacifica backstory that emerges in this episode is quietly devastating. She has been the queen bee of Gravity Falls, the mean girl, the rich and untouchable antagonist who looks down on the Pines twins, and everyone else who isn't wearing the right clothes in the right town. That version of Pacifica always felt a little thin. She was clearly coded as the foil for Mabel, but she wasn't quite interesting enough to be threatening, and not quite sympathetic enough to be compelling. She occupied a narrative slot without fully inhabiting it. And then her parents ring the bell and everything becomes clear. Pacifica isn't cruel because she's a bad person. She isn't condescending because she believes herself to be superior. She has been shaped deliberately and systematically by parents who wanted a product rather than a daughter. A Northwest who could move through high society without a crack in the surface, who would uphold the family's prestige, who would never, under any circumstances, embarrass them by being too human in public. The haughtiness is not personality. The dismissiveness is not character. They are the outputs of a conditioning process that began before Pacifica was old enough to know she was being shaped. Her mother corrects her on the color of her dress. Not the style, not whether it's appropriate for the occasion, but the specific shade, shot distinguishing between lake foam green and sea foam green, as if this distinction were a matter of genuine moral consequence. When Pacifica says she likes the dress, her mother doesn't respond to that preference at all. It registers as noise. Her father keeps the bell in his pocket. The Northwest family history that the episode slowly reveals adds another layer. The ghost haunting the mansion is Archibald, the spirit of a lumberjack who is notably an ancestor of Wendy Corduroy's, which is a lovely piece of class commentary, the wealthy family haunted by the man their ancestors exploited. The original Northwests promised Archibald that if he and his crew built the Northwest Manor, common people would always be welcome inside. When the manor was finished, they broke the promise, excluded the common folk, and Archibald died cursed and furious. The Northwests have been throwing their annual high society shindig every year since, excluding the regular people of Gravity Falls, maintaining the lie that the founder family of the town built their fortune on hard work and good character rather than exploitation and broken promises. Pacifica has grown up inside that lie, which means she has grown up inside a story about her family that cannot survive contact with reality. When Dipper tells her the truth, that she's just another link in the world's worst chain, it's not gentle. It's not particularly fair to a 12-year-old who has had very limited agency over her family's history. But it's honest, and Pacifica needed someone to be honest with her because no one in her life had been before. What Pacifica does with the truth is what makes her arc so emotionally satisfying. She doesn't immediately transform. She doesn't have a sudden personality transplant. She's scared and conflicted and ashamed and angry all at once, the way actual people are when they learn something that forces a reevaluation of everything they've been told about who they are. And then her father rings the bell, and all of that, all the complexity and the genuine moral struggle happening inside her, gets yanked away by a conditioned reflex, and she starts to move toward the panic room again. The ghost has turned everyone else in the mansion into wood at this point. Dipper himself is a wooden statue. Pacifica is the only living person in the room. Her father is telling her to come to the panic room and save herself. Her trained response is saying the same thing. And she stands there alone with the lever that will open the gates and let the regular people of Gravity Falls into the party that has always excluded them, and she fights the bell with everything she has. She pulls the lever. The ghost is satisfied. The curse lifts. Dipper is restored. And Pacifica, still in her party dress, walks through the magnificent hallway of her family's mansion with muddy shoes and presses them deliberately into the carpet her parents are most proud of, grinding the mud in with calm, deliberate joy. It is one of the most cathartic moments in the show. She can't dismantle the conditioning overnight. She can't change her parents. She can't undo her family's history. But she can get mud on the carpet. Now she can choose one specific act of defiance and make it mean something. The credit cipher for Northwest Mansion Mystery, Decoded, reads, "The Northwest family hides their guilt and their shame behind a trail of pretty lies. There's a secondary page cipher in the episode that, when cracked, lists the things the Society of the Blind Eye has been helping various Gravity Falls residents forget. Gideon's tantrums, misspelled tattoos, Chandra's rejections, society's views, a fear of witches, a life of regret. These are the things that they try to forget. Pacifica and her father are on the list of people who have used the Society's services. Both of them had traumatic memories removed. Both of them chose forgetting over carrying the weight of the things they'd done. Pacifica, at 12 years old, with Dipper's support and her own defiant heart, chose differently. She looked at the weight and didn't flinch. She opened the gates. Story 6. Suze and the Father Who Never Came. This one is shorter than the others. Not because there's less to say, but because the story is simple, and simple things sometimes cut deeper than complicated ones. Suze Ramirez has been working at the Mystery Shack since he was 12 years old. He started working there after he left a screwdriver at the shack and came back to return it, and Stan Pines, who had recently fired the previous employee Durland, essentially drafted him into the job on the spot. Suze has been there ever since. He does repairs. He dresses up in costume as Soos the Human, the Mystery Shack's mascot. He drives the twins wherever they need to go and believes everything they tell him about the supernatural without requiring proof first. He is, functionally, the heart of the Mystery Shack, the warmth that makes it feel like a home rather than a fraud. Soos is 22 years old when the series begins. He still lives with his grandmother, his abuelita, in a house that is small and slightly run down and is clearly the only stable thing he's had in a childhood that contains certain structural absences. He is man-child coded in the way that a lot of comedy characters are. The big, lovable guy who hasn't quite grown up, who makes jokes and bounces off things and doesn't take himself too seriously. The show lets you enjoy that version of him for quite a while before it shows you why he is the way he is. The episode is Blendon's Game. Now, it's a time travel episode. Dipper and Mabel use a time anomaly to travel back to the year 2002 to investigate why Suze despises his birthday so much, because he's always treated the day with elaborate avoidance and refused to explain why. The answer is what you probably already suspect if you've lived long enough. Every year on his birthday, Suze waits for his father. His father has not come. Not once. Suze, at 12 years old in the memory Dipper and Mabel witness, has set out a birthday cake. He has set up a seat of honor at the table, the best chair, pushed up to the best position, for the father he is expecting. There is a present on the chair, and then the mail arrives, and instead of his father, there is a postcard from New Orleans, scrawled with an apology and a promise for next year. Next year did not bring his father either. As Dipper, watching this, says something that is one of the truest lines in the show. This goes beyond anything we know how to fix. He is 12 when he says it. He's right. There is no time paradox clever enough, no wish powerful enough, no intervention possible that would make Suze's father a different man than he is. The absence is not a problem with a solution. It is simply a wound that Suze has been carrying since he was a child, and the birthday is the day the wound opens again every year, which is why he has spent years treating his birthday as a thing to be survived rather than celebrated. When Dipper and Mabel win the time travel competition they've been forced into and earn a wish. Any wish, one wish. The most powerful possible tool in Gravity Falls' supernatural economy. They bring it to Suze. They could use it for themselves. They don't. They ask Suze what he wants. They ask him if he wants them to go back and put his father in his life. And Suze thinks about it. He thinks about the father he never had, and about what it would mean to have grown up with that presence, and about whether the version of himself that would exist after such a change would be someone he recognizes. He says no. He says that he has a family already. He has his abuelita. He has Stan. He has Dipper and Mabel. He has people who have shown up for him in ways that matter. And the absence of the man who wouldn't show up stopped defining him somewhere along the way, even if it still hurts every birthday. The show doesn't make a big deal about this moment. It's not scored with swelling music. Dipper and Mabel just hear his answer and accept it. Because they are good kids who understand that this is not their decision to make. The wish goes unused. Stan's relationship with Suze is the other half of this story, and it's one that the show mostly gives you in glimpses rather than spotlights. Stan is not a demonstrative man. He did not sit Seuss down and tell him he loved him and that he was proud of him and that he was a son in every way that mattered. He didn't do that with Dipper and Mabel either. Not explicitly, not in words. But he gave Seuss a job when Seuss was 12 and didn't have much. And he kept him there, and he did the particular thing that Stan Pines has always been better at than he pretends. He showed up. At the end of the series, Stan promotes Seuss to manager of the Mystery Shack. He calls it in from the boat on the last day of summer, on the way out to sea with Ford to live the dream they'd had when they were 17. He's giving Seuss the thing he built for 30 years. He's saying, as plainly as he ever says anything that matters, "This is yours, and you are worthy of it, and I trust you with it." Seuss's name is technically Jesus, Spanish for Jesus, pronounced differently, a name his grandmother gave him because she believed in miracles. There is a gentleness to that detail. There is a gentleness to everything about Seuss if you look at it straight on. A man who was abandoned by his father and grew into someone who would give away a wish for someone else's happiness, who would drive two 12-year-olds through a supernatural forest at midnight without question, who would cry about things in a season 1 episode and not be embarrassed about it, who would be the genuine and unwavering heart of a building full of secrets and a family full of complicated love. His name means Jesus, and he is the warmest person in Gravity Falls, and Alex Hirsch put a man-child joke veneer over all of it because that's how Gravity Falls works. The comedy is the surface. The truth is underneath. There's a moment in Weirdmageddon 2 when Mabel has created her perfect dream bubble world, and Seuss has been given the version of his father he always wanted, that I keep coming back to. Mabel's Mabeland is constructed from everyone's deepest wishes. For Dipper, there's a beautiful, uncomplicated version of the love interest he's always wanted. For Wendy, there are her best friends inviting her to do the things she loves most. For Seuss, there's a man named Ernesto who has the body of a pro wrestler and the face Seuss once saw in a hot sauce bottle, and a wrestling belt that reads Pay, which is Spanish for daddy. He is every inch what Seuss imagined his father could be. And the moment Seuss sees him, this ridiculous, impossible, deeply tender construction of what a father might look like through the eyes of a boy who never had one, his defenses fall away completely. He was the one who promised Dipper, "There's nothing in this world that could break me from our mission." And then his imaginary father walked in and held out a baseball glove and asked if he wanted to play catch. And Seuss was gone. Just like that. It is one of the most quietly devastating moments in the show, tucked inside a comedy sequence involving a sentient dream world. And it works so completely because by the time you get there, you know everything about Seuss, and the chair set out for his father, and the postcard from New Orleans. Mabeland understands him perfectly. It gives him the precise shape of the absence he's been carrying. And Seuss, who is good and loving and generous and funny and real, still wants it enough to forget everything else for a little while. He comes back. Of course he comes back. He is Seuss, and Dipper is his friend, and the mission matters. But the moment of him going, the moment where the imaginary father is enough to stop him in his tracks, is the show telling you one more time how deep the wound actually goes, and how gently Seuss has been carrying it all this time. You have to earn it by paying attention. Story 7. The journals and what was written in invisible ink. Stanford Pines spent 6 years in Gravity Falls before he wrote the first warning. He had been documenting everything. Every creature, every anomaly. Every piece of impossible evidence that the town's supernatural density was not random occurrence, but something more deliberate, more structured, more intentional. Journal 1. Journal 2. The beginning of Journal 3. 3 volumes of meticulous observation, careful illustration, scientific notation, and the particular breathless excitement of a man who had found the thing he was put on Earth to do and was doing it with everything he had. And then Bill Cipher came, and Ford learned the truth, and he spent the rest of his time in Gravity Falls writing a different kind of entry. The kind with the double meanings, the invisible ink layers, the warnings disguised as curiosities, the desperate attempts to build something that could survive the collapse he knew was coming. The journals are, on their surface, a field guide to the supernatural of Gravity Falls. They document gnomes, zombies, the shapeshifter, the time anomaly generator, the gremlin, the creatures of Lake Gravity Falls, and approximately 100 other things that a person walking in the woods around that town might encounter without warning. They are practically written with the matter-of-fact tone of someone who takes the impossible seriously because the impossible keeps showing up and deserves the dignity of documentation. But underneath the practical entries, Ford was constructing something more personal and more urgent. He wrote certain entries in invisible ink, only visible under blacklight. Journal 3 has a layer of it that only becomes apparent when you hold a blacklight to the pages, a layer that the real-world published version of the journal replicates, because Alex Hirsch was not going to publish Ford's field guide without the hidden layer, which is exactly the right call. The physical book comes in a special edition that includes a blacklight pen so that readers can reveal what's underneath, because of course it does. The show was always teaching its audience to look deeper. The book just extends the lesson to your hands. What's in the invisible ink is, predictably, the more frightening material. It includes Ford's developing understanding of what Bill is and what Bill wants. It includes warnings written to potential future readers. Whatever you do, never let him into your mind. It includes the entries about the portal, stripped of the professional tone and written in something closer to raw fear. There's a detail in the visible ink sections that is easy to miss and quietly stunning. The entry about Bill's Cipher, which is probably the most important piece of documentation in all three journals, contains a symbol cipher encoded in the background behind Bill's name. When decoded, it reads, "Liar, Monster, Snappy Dresser." The snappy dresser is a joke, and it's a perfect joke, and it's doing something extremely specific. It's telling you that Ford could still make jokes, even at the height of his terror. The man who wrote these journals was not broken by what happened to him. He was frightened and betrayed and operating in genuine danger. And he still left a joke embedded in the most ominous entry in the book. That's what kind of person Ford was. That's what the journals are if you read them as the record of a human being rather than just a plot device. The journals were hidden in 3 separate locations around Gravity Falls after Ford completed them. He hid them because he understood that the knowledge needed to activate the interdimensional portal was distributed across all 3 books, and that if all 3 were in one place, they could be assembled and used to open the portal by anyone determined enough to find them, including Bill, who needed exactly that. The separation was a security measure. It was also, Ford must have known, a gamble. If he was trapped in the portal before he could destroy the knowledge himself, the journals would be out there, waiting to be found by whoever came next. What he likely did not anticipate was that the next person to find Journal 3 would be a 12-year-old boy who'd spent his childhood feeling like an outsider in every room he entered, who would recognize something of himself in the voice writing those entries, who would become the journal's best possible guardian, not because of what he knew, but because of who he was. Dipper Pines keeps Journal 3 for most of the series with a care that goes beyond strategic protection. He reads it the way you read something you need. He carries it everywhere. He annotates it in his own margins, his handwriting smaller and more uncertain than Ford's, but asking the same questions, pressing toward the same dark edges with the same stubborn willingness to look. Like when he finally meets Ford in person and Ford realizes who Dipper is, not just Stan's grandnephew, but someone who has been in genuine dialogue with the journals for an entire summer. There is a moment of recognition between them that the show earns completely. 2 people who read the same books and found themselves in the pages. There is one more detail about the journals that settles into you slowly and gets heavier the longer you think about it. After Weirdmageddon is over and Bill is defeated, Bill burns all 3 journals in a bonfire. Pages scatter. The books seem destroyed. And then, after everything is over, Seuss goes back into the ruins and finds them intact. Defeating Bill didn't just restore the town. It restored things he destroyed. The journals were in the bottomless pit at the end of the published version story, thrown there by the family who decided they'd caused enough trouble. Things thrown into the bottomless pit can end up anywhere. The journals could be anywhere. In your dimension. In someone's attic. In a woods somewhere, 3 of them separated, waiting to be found again by whoever comes next. There's something worth saying about the physical journals as objects, and about what Alex Hirsch did when he published them in the real world. The Real World Journal 3 came out on July 26, 2016, a few months after the show ended, and it became a #1 New York Times bestseller and stayed on the list for 47 weeks. The special edition, limited to 10,000 copies, came with a monocle, parchment pages, removable photographs and notes, and blacklight writing throughout. You needed the blacklight to read what Ford had hidden. Well, you needed to hold the right kind of light up to the page and look at what was underneath what you could normally see. Alex Hirsch has never had a moment of accidental metaphor in his creative life. The blacklight requirement for reading Ford's private thoughts is a deliberate choice by a man who spent 2 seasons of television teaching his audience that nothing in Gravity Falls can be understood by looking at only what's on the surface. The book extended the show's central lesson into your hands. The lesson is always the same. You have to look closer. You have to bring your own light. The second journal, Journal 2, which Gideon steals, and which becomes a key plot point in the first season finale, is documented in show canon as containing the more dangerous material. It goes deeper into the supernatural entities of Gravity Falls, deeper into Ford's paranoia, and most significantly it contains early entries about Bill Cipher. The first moments when Ford was beginning to understand that he was being watched, that something in the weirdness of the town was organized around an intention rather than occurring naturally. Journal 2 shows Ford in the transition between wonder and fear, in the period when the research was starting to turn on him. Journal 1 is the oldest, the most hopeful, the one written before Bill made contact. It is the document of a scientist who found a town full of impossible things and was simply, genuinely delighted. There are entries in Journal 1, according to the show's documentation, that read as pure joy. The discovery of gnomes, the first documented sighting of various creatures, the early attempts to catalog and understand a place that had no business being as strange as it was. Journal 1 is Ford before he knew he was being watched. It is Ford at his most innocent, which is a word you would not normally apply to a man who invented a mind control tie and a device to swap consciousnesses. But innocence is relative, and relative to everything that would come later. Early Journal 1 is just a man who loved his work. The 3 journals together form a complete arc: joy, fear, survival. The world as it appeared. The world as it revealed itself to be. The knowledge needed to keep the worst of it from escaping. 3 books, 3 emotional registers, one man's life compressed into field notes that would outlast everything he built. Dipper reads all 3 of them over the course of the series. He starts with 3, moves to 2 when it becomes available, and encounters portions of 1 through other means. By the end of the summer, he has read Ford's entire arc, which is to say he has read a warning, taken it seriously, and survived it. Ford, when he comes back and meets Dipper, is meeting someone who has already gone through the most important part of his education using Ford's own materials. The conversation between them, when they finally have it, is between someone who wrote the map and someone who has already been using the map to navigate. Ford offers to take Dipper with him when he leaves Gravity Falls at the end of summer. He offers to be his mentor, his guide through interdimensional research, the missing piece of the education that no ordinary school would provide. And Dipper considers it, for a moment, a genuine moment. He considers saying yes. He chooses Mabel instead. He chooses the summer. He chooses the person who has been there with him every step of the way, who doesn't need him to be exceptional to love him, who will be heartbroken if he doesn't come home. He chooses the relationship over the opportunity, and the show respects that choice completely. It doesn't frame the Ford offer as a trick or a mistake. Ford genuinely wants to help Dipper grow, and the offer is genuine. But Dipper genuinely wants something else more. And knowing what you want most, being able to feel it clearly enough to choose it when the choice is hard, is one of the things that separates Dipper from Ford in a way that matters. Ford's isolation was partly circumstance and partly choice. Every choice he made that led away from other people he justified as the demands of his work, the requirements of his research, the price of his ambition. Dipper looks at that path with clear eyes and turns back. The journals taught him. The journals, in the end, taught him something Ford had been unable to learn from writing them. Story 8. Euclidia, the Dimension Bill. Destroyed Bill Cipher is at least 1 trillion years old. Let that number settle for a moment. The entire history of human civilization on Earth spans roughly 10,000 years. The universe itself is approximately 13.8 billion years old, That's 13,800 million years, which is a number so large it stops meaning anything to normal human cognition. Now, Bill's Cipher existed for at least 1 trillion years before the events of Gravity Falls, in a dimension he called Euclidia, among beings called Euclideans who were two-dimensional shapes experiencing two-dimensional lives with two-dimensional dreams. He could see the third dimension. He was the only one who could. And in his world, mentioning such a thing was forbidden. What happens next in Bill's origin story is something the Book of Bill reveals with the particular unreliability of a narrator who you have been told, repeatedly, cannot be trusted with the truth about himself. Bill describes Euclidia as a prison of flatness, a world of minds so narrow they couldn't conceive of depth, and himself as a liberator who simply wanted to show his people what they were missing. He wanted to give them the third dimension, that he wanted to give them everything he could see that they couldn't. It went wrong. This is the part of Bill's story that sits in you differently depending on what you bring to it. The Book of Bill describes the moment with the kind of fragmentary, interrupted quality of a memory that cannot be faced head-on. Bill could hear screams getting louder. Blood was everywhere. His hands began shaking. The last one of his dimension took a breath, and then there was silence and Bill was alone. He had destroyed everyone and everything he had ever known, trying to share with them the one thing he valued most. The Gravity Falls wiki entry on Euclidia describes this as the Euclidean Massacre. The Book of Bill suggests it was an accident, that Bill didn't intend to destroy his people, that the mechanism of the destruction was something that went wrong with his plan rather than something he chose. The show itself had already implied, through Ford's recounting, that Bill's liberation of his dimension was an act of violence that left him alone in the universe. And his reaction in the Weird Mageddon finale, showing concern, his eye flickering to flames and screams even as he claims to have loved it, makes more sense in the context of someone who has been lying to themselves for 1 trillion years about the worst thing they've ever done. He described Euclidia to Ford as a place of flat minds in a flat world with flat dreams. He said he liberated it. He has been saying he liberated it for 1 trillion years. And you can hear, underneath the performance, the thing that all that time and all that repetition is covering. The sound of his hands shaking over an outcome he could not undo and could never quite stop hearing. After Euclidia, there was the Nightmare Realm. Dimension Zero, a seething space between dimensions where physics doesn't apply and chaos is the only constant. Bill spent 1 trillion years there, waiting for a way out. Not the comfortable, patient waiting of someone who knows their time will come. The waiting of someone trapped. He describes the Nightmare Realm as his own decaying dimension, in which he had been trapped for 1 trillion years. The dimension is described in the show's documentation as filled with pure chaos due to its lack of constant physics, which sounds terrifying and is also, if you think about it, probably deeply boring after the first few billion years. And all chaos all the time is still monotony. The only variation is scale. And then he found humans. He found that human minds were specific and structured and could be entered, that dreams were doorways, that a sufficiently brilliant and isolated human could be convinced to build him a bridge between dimensions if you just knew how to approach it. He spent centuries looking for the right person, the right mind, the right combination of genius and loneliness and ambition. He found Ford. The thing? The Book of Bill adds to this. The thing that makes the whole story more complicated and more human is the suggestion that Bill's original home dimension could have survived. The axolotl, the most powerful being in Gravity Falls mythology, described variously as a cosmic force as Bill's opposite number, as the entity whose power exceeds even Bill's, apparently has the capacity to restore Euclidia. After Bill's defeat, according to the Book of Bill, Bill strikes a deal with the axolotl from a place called the Theraprism, a rehabilitation center outside space and time. He is not destroyed. He is rehabilitated. Or at least he is somewhere that describes itself as rehabilitative, while he makes a book about how to help him escape it. The axolotl is connected, in Gravity Falls mythology, to a poem that Dipper speaks to summon the entity after the final battle. The poem is about Bill, and about what it would take to redeem him, and about the choice he made long ago that he has been unable to unmake. The axolotl tells Dipper that redemption is possible if Bill can be humble enough to choose it, a condition that, given Bill's entire documented personality, reads as a gentle way of saying he probably won't. But probably is not certainly. Somewhere outside space and time, a trillion-year-old two-dimensional demon is in what describes itself as therapy, possibly working on a book, definitely still capable of chaos, and possibly, maybe in a direction the story hasn't gone yet, carrying the specific kind of grief that comes from having destroyed the only world you ever belonged to, and having had a trillion years to understand what that means. The woods around Gravity Falls, Oregon, have his statue in them. The hand is still outstretched. The deal is still on the table. Don't touch it. Let's sit inside Euclidia a little longer, though. But it's because the mythology of that place, the world Bill came from, is one of the most genuinely haunting pieces of lore in the show's entire extended universe. And it rewards the kind of slow, careful attention that Gravity Falls always rewards. Euclidia was a two-dimensional realm. Not two-dimensional the way a drawing is two-dimensional, with depth implied by shading and perspective, genuinely, physically, metaphysically flat. Its inhabitants were sentient shapes, two-dimensional geometric forms with minds and societies and dreams, all moving on a plane, all experiencing reality as a line. Their field of vision was literally a single flat line before them, because there was no up or down in any sense they could perceive. You can imagine the geometry of it if you try, a world where everyone is a shape moving along a surface. It's seeing only what is directly ahead, with no concept of above or below, because above and below don't exist in the same way. No depth, no sky, no floor beneath you in any meaningful sense, because the surface is the world. Bill could see depth. From inside that flat world, from inside that line of sight, he could see the third dimension, could see up and down and through and beyond, could see the world from outside itself, could see what it looked like from a perspective that his dimension forbade. And he was medicated to prevent this. The Book of Bill contains hidden codes that, when decoded, suggest that he was given some form of treatment to suppress his ability to perceive the third dimension, that the Society of Euclidia had a medical mechanism for ensuring that no one who could see further would use that sight to disturb the order of the flat world. Think about what that means. There was a world where seeing more clearly than other people was classified as an illness, where the cure for perception was suppression, where the most meaningful thing Bill could do, share what he saw, was illegal and medicated away. He did it anyway. He took himself off the medication or found a way around it, or simply decided at some point that the medication was wrong, and he was right and the world was small and needed to see itself from the outside, and then he tried to show everyone. It went horribly wrong. The Book of Bill's account of the massacre is fragmentary and self-interrupted, narrated by someone who is simultaneously trying to tell you what happened and unable to face the full version of it. You piece it together the way you piece anything traumatic together when the person telling you was the one who caused it. In glimpses, in the things they say and don't say, in the specific words they choose to describe something so that they don't have to use the accurate words. Bill calls it a liberation. He has been calling it a liberation for a trillion years. Underneath the word liberation, if you listen for it, is the sound of screaming getting louder. The Gravity Falls fandom. Wiki's entry on Euclidia notes that encoded in a Morse code message buried in the official Gravity Falls lo-fi album. The kind of detail that only exists because Alex Hirsch is constitutionally incapable of leaving things clean, is a message that says simply, "Remember Euclidia." Not a warning. Not a threat, just the name of a place that was destroyed, and a request not to forget it. Who is the message addressed to? Bill, Ford, the audience? All three seem possible. Maybe the message is addressed to anyone who ends up in conversation with a story about a powerful being who burned down everything around them trying to share the one thing they valued, and has been calling it a gift ever since. Maybe it's a reminder to check whether the liberation being offered is actually yours to accept. After Euclidia, there was the Nightmare Realm, and after the Nightmare Realm, there was Ford, and after Ford, there was Weirdmageddon, and after Weirdmageddon, there was the Theraprism, the place outside of space and time where Bill currently resides, in what the Gravity Falls expanded universe describes as a rehabilitation center for the deceased. Not punished, not erased, rehabilitated, which implies someone, the axolotl presumably, believes rehabilitation is possible. The axolotl is the most powerful entity in Gravity Falls mythology. More powerful than Bill. More ancient, probably. Described in the show's extended universe as Bill's opposite in some meaningful sense, connected to the Aztec deity Xolotl in ways that involve twins and death and transformation, as appearing to Ford during his interdimensional travels as a human woman, who spoke of Bill without anger, but with the specific sadness of someone who has watched something go wrong for a very long time and is still hoping it can go right. She wanted Bill defeated. She also, seemingly, wants something more for him than defeat. The axolotl gave Dipper a poem. The poem tells him that Bill can be redeemed if he can be humble enough to choose it. That the choice exists. That the path back to whatever Bill's version of wholeness might look like after a trillion years and a destroyed dimension and everything that followed is technically available. Bill's hand is still extended in the woods. One-eyed, yellow, stone cold, making the offer he's always making. And somewhere outside of time, in a therapy room that Bill almost certainly finds deeply undignified, a triangle is sitting with the fact that he was the only one left in his world and has been alone ever since and has spent a trillion years telling himself it was fine. It was liberation. He chose this. It was always the plan. The axolotl waits. Gravity Falls waits. The hand stays extended, and the story isn't finished yet. Story 9, The Cipher Hunt, when the mystery left the screen. In the summer of 2016, a few months after Gravity Falls aired its final episode, Alex Hirsch posted a photograph. He was standing in front of a stone statue of Bill Cipher. The statue was painted yellow. The single eye was closed. The hand was outstretched in the familiar gesture of the offer. It looked exactly like the Bill Cipher statue glimpsed very briefly in the final seconds of Weirdmageddon 3, the series finale. A blink-and-miss-it moment where the statue appears in the Oregon woods as a final, eerie note, suggesting that Bill, in some form, was still out there. The photograph was the opening move in what Hirsch called the Cipher Hunt, an international real-world treasure hunt that asked fans to find where the statue had been placed. The hunt began on July 20th, 2016, and it was deliberately, specifically designed to be unsolvable by any single person working alone. The clues were distributed globally. Some were hidden in digital spaces, on websites, in image metadata, in files embedded in Hirsch's social media posts. Others were physical, notes hidden in specific locations in the United States, Japan, and Russia. The coordinates of one clue led fans to a specific intersection in St. Petersburg, Russia, where a physical envelope had been left for whoever arrived first to retrieve it. Let that sink in. The creator of a Disney animated series about a supernatural small town in Oregon hid physical clues in Russia in service of a treasure hunt he designed to be impossible to solve without international collaboration. The fandom, which had been solving Gravity Falls cryptograms together in real time for years, turned out to be extraordinarily well equipped for this kind of challenge. Online communities organized almost immediately, sharing clues, distributing the interpretive work, building tools to decode whatever system Hirsch was using for any given puzzle. Fans in Russia found the Russian clue. Fans in Japan found the Japanese clue. Fans in Los Angeles found the California clue. A group eventually triangulated to Reedsport, Oregon, a small coastal town surrounded by the kind of dense Pacific Northwest forest that would have looked completely comfortable in the world of Gravity Falls, and found the statue hidden in the woods. The hunt ran from July 20th to August 3rd, 2016. 2 weeks. The statue is now in Confusion Hill, California, which is, appropriately, a roadside tourist attraction famous for its optical illusions. A real-world place where things are not quite what they seem, where gravity appears to behave unexpectedly, where the world is reliably strange. The inspiration for the Mystery Shack itself is generally cited as Confusion Hill and similar Oregon roadside oddities. The Bill Cipher statue living there now is either an amazing coincidence or Hirsch knew exactly where it would end up, which is the kind of possibility that Gravity Falls has always invited you to hold open. For a while before finding its permanent home, the statue had its own small adventure. After fans discovered it in Reedsport, Oregon, it was confiscated by local police. Apparently, someone reported that fans were accessing the area in ways that raised safety concerns, and then eventually moved and given a new hat after the original was taken. The statue continued to be a source of small chaos even after being found, which is so completely in character for a statue of Bill Cipher that you almost wonder if Hirsch planned it. The thing about the Cipher hunt that gets to me, years later, is what it revealed about the Gravity Falls community and what Hirsch understood about it. He had spent 4 years building a show that rewarded collective effort. The Ciphers required fan communities to work together, to share solutions, to discuss interpretations. He had built an audience that was already practice-biased in the specific collaborative puzzle solving that the hunt required. The hunt was not just a promotional exercise or a farewell gift. It was the final expression of everything the show had been doing with its audience since the very first episode. The relationship between Gravity Falls and its viewers has always been unusually active. The show didn't ask you to watch, it asked you to participate. It hid the keys in the theme song, it hid the symbols in the background. It put the answer to the first season's central mystery in the opening credits, right there, decodable with 3 letters back. It was always saying, you can find this if you try. You can understand this if you're paying attention. You are not a passive observer of this story. You are in it. The Cipher Hunt was the fullest possible expression of that invitation. The story left the screen and entered the physical world and asked the people who had spent 4 years paying attention to find where it had gone. They found it in 2 weeks. Hirsch said in an interview around that time that when he was adding the secret codes to the show, he expected maybe 2 or 3 people to notice. But he said this with what sounds like genuine wonder, that he was sitting up until 3 in the morning, adding hidden layers to a kid's cartoon and expecting almost no one to find them, and instead created a community of thousands of people who not only found everything, but documented it, analyzed it, shared it, built tools for it, and eventually flew to Russia to pick up an envelope from an intersection in St. Petersburg. Here's what I find most moving about the Cipher Hunt, when I think about it the right way. It was a goodbye that refused to be final. The show ended in February 2016, and the ending was deliberate and well-crafted and felt complete in the way that good endings do. But then a few months later, there was a photograph of a statue, and suddenly the story was continuing in a new form, in the physical world, now requiring the community to show up one more time. Hirsch gave the fandom a final summer adventure. He gave them a real mystery to solve together, with a real answer that could be physically touched and photographed and documented. He gave them, in other words, what Gravity Falls had always given its viewers. The experience of being on the inside of something strange and wonderful, of being the kind of person who notices and persists and finds what's hidden. He trusted them. They came through. There is a particular beauty to creative work that trusts its audience this much. Most entertainment asks very little of you. Gravity Falls asked for your attention, your patience, your willingness to look closely and come back again. It asked you to care about things that were easy to miss, and it kept rewarding you for it. And right up to the moment, someone stood in the Oregon woods with their hands on a Yellowstone statue and felt the whole strange long journey of it arrive in a single physical moment. The show is over. The mystery isn't. The Cipher Hunt gave you that. It said, whatever else is true, there is a real object in the real world that is part of the story. The story touched this place. You can go and touch it too. And somewhere in Confusion Hill, California, Bill Cipher's hand is still extended, still offering, still waiting. You know better than to take it, but you can look. You can always look. Story 10. The ending that was hiding in the beginning. Let's go back to the opening credits. They are 30 seconds long. They have played before every single episode of Gravity Falls, which means if you watched the show when it aired, you probably saw them at least 40 times. And if you're the kind of person watching a video like this one tonight, you've probably seen them more than that. You know the theme, you know the pacing, you know the moment Dipper's bag falls open and the photo spills out. You have seen this opening, and there's a reasonable chance that you have not seen all of it. There is a very brief flash of the Bill Cipher wheel during the opening. It appears for a fraction of a second surrounded by symbols: a pine tree, a shooting star, a 6-fingered hand, a question mark, a llama, an ice bag, a pair of glasses, a pentagram, a crescent, a heart. Each symbol orbits the central triangle with the single eye. When the show first aired, this wheel was mysterious in the way that a lot of Gravity Falls imagery was mysterious. You could feel it meant something, you could see it was organized, but you couldn't decode the system. The symbols were unfamiliar, the arrangement seemed intentional, but the reference point to interpret it hadn't been established yet. By the series finale, the reference point has been firmly established. The wheel is a prophecy. Each symbol represents a specific person who must join together in a circle to defeat Bill Cipher. The pine tree is Dipper. The shooting star is Mabel. The six-fingered hand is Ford. The question mark is Seuss. The llama is Pacifica. The ice bag is McGucket. The glasses are Gideon. The pentagram is Bill's symbol. The crescent was Stan's symbol, though this was quietly altered in the Disney Plus version of the show for reasons related to a real-world religious symbol that the Fez originally bore. The heart is Wendy. Every one of these characters was present in the opening credits from the very beginning. The wheel was always there, the prophecy was always there. The story of who would matter and how they would matter and what they would be asked to do was baked into the show before the audience had met half the people represented by those symbols. Alex Hirsch said in interviews that he had the beginning, middle, and end of Gravity Falls worked out before he pitched it. He planned the ending first. He hid the ending in the opening. He trusted that at some point, someone would look at the wheel and understand it, and then look back at all the times they'd watched the credits without knowing, and feel exactly the kind of retroactive revelation that Gravity Falls specializes in creating. Consider what this means structurally. Dipper's pine tree hat, the hat he finds in a box of old clothing in the first episode, the hat that becomes his signature, the hat we associate with his character, so completely that the symbol on it appears on every piece of Gravity Falls merchandise ever made. That hat's symbol was chosen because it would appear on the wheel. The tree wasn't given to Dipper and then placed on the wheel because Dipper matters. The tree was on the wheel first, and then a character was built to wear it. The hat found him because the story had always known he would need it. This is also true of Mabel's shooting stars, as it is true of the sweater that has the shooting star on it that she wears in the first episode. It is true of the fact that Ford was designed with 6 fingers before the audience needed to know what those fingers meant. Every visual signature was chosen in service of an ending that had already been written, visible in the opening credits, waiting. There are smaller versions of this embedded throughout the show. In the very first episode, Tourist Trapped, while Dipper is discovering Journal 3 in the forest, if you pause and look carefully at the trees around him, there are tiny eyes watching from the darkness between the branches. Just little glowing dots, easily dismissed as atmospheric detail. Bill was watching from the moment the journal was found. He was there in the background of the discovery, but present at the beginning of the thing that would eventually lead to his defeat, observing with his characteristic amusement the scene that would set everything in motion. The Stano Warboat, the wrecked fishing boat that the twins board in the second episode as a throwaway bit of plot business in The Legend of the Gobblewonker, is named the Stano War. An almost identical boat appears in A Tale of Two Stans, in the flashback to Stan and Ford's childhood, where the brothers are shown fixing up an abandoned boat and naming it the same thing as part of their dream of sailing the world together. The show put the brothers' dream in the background of the second episode, in an object the twins step over on their way to look for a lake monster, and then waited 29 episodes to tell you what it meant. The number 618 appears in episode after episode as a production code prefix, as Stan's prisoner number in Not What He Seems, 061800, as the address of the Mystery Shack, 618 Gopher Road, as the date of the introduction page in Journal 3, June 18th or June 18th. June 18th is Alex Hirsch's own birthday. He embedded his birthday in the DNA of the show and watched it surface across 2 seasons in dozens of places, as if the show itself had a birth date that it kept quietly celebrating. Old Man McGucket's Conspiracy Marathon, a series of fake segments played in the background of an episode, includes one titled 618, in which he talks about a recurring number haunting his dreams that comes from a creature in another dimension. He doesn't know what it means. He has no way of knowing that it means the birthday of the man who made him, that he is experiencing as mystery what the audience can experience as warmth, if they know what to look for. This is the final quality of Gravity Falls that makes it worth coming back to, the quality that this video has been circling around since the beginning. The show is different depending on what you bring to it. It is genuinely different, not just richer, different. The experience of watching it the first time, not knowing, is one thing. The experience of watching it knowing is another thing entirely, and neither experience is better than the other. Both are true. Both are what the show was designed to be. Hirsch trusted his audience to come back. He trusted them to be older when they did. He trusted that the children who watched it when they were 8 or 10 or 12 would return as teenagers, as young adults, as people who had accumulated enough living to read the things the show had been trying to tell them about Ford's isolation, and Stan's love, and McGucket's grief, and Pacifica's fear, and all the rest of it. There is something the show does in the opening that deserves its own moment of attention. Something that barely registers on first watch and becomes quietly devastating once you know the full story. The opening credits sequence of photographs, the ones that fall from the top of the screen, includes images of creatures and characters and events from the show. But if you look at the photos of the villains and the enemies and the dangerous things, you'll notice they're captured in moments that belong to the future of the show. They haven't happened yet when the credits roll for episode 1. Now, the opening was made with the full knowledge of where the story would go, which means the photographs are not a record of events that have already occurred. They are prophecy presented as memory. The opening pretends to be a scrapbook. It is actually a map. And then there's the theme itself. Gravity Falls. The song that plays under the credits is bouncy and warm and slightly eerie in its minor key undertones, and it is doing a very specific thing. It is the exact emotional tone of the show compressed into 40 seconds. Fun on the surface. Worried underneath. A major melody with a shadow. If you listen to it now, knowing what you know, it sounds like the sound of summer, before summer ends. Joyful and a little anxious, moving forward because that's what summer does. Unable to stop. And then the show begins. Every time. All 40 episodes. You hear that theme and you go back in, and every time you bring something you didn't bring before, and every time the show meets you where you are and shows you what you're ready to see. The opening credits have always contained the ending. The mystery was always about the people watching it. The answer was always, has always been, right there, 3 letters back. Outro. The warmth underneath it all. So there they are. 10 stories from a show that was always hiding more than you thought. I want to end not with a mystery, but with something simple, because this video has been a long road through a lot of difficult things, and I think you deserve something warm at the end of it. Here's what I want to leave with you. Gravity Falls is not fundamentally a show about secrets. And it's not about codes or ciphers or prophecies or demons or interdimensional portals. Those are the structure. Those are the walls. What the show is actually about is a summer. One specific summer, irreplaceable and unrepeatable, between 2 people who loved each other and were about to grow in different directions, and spent 11 weeks in a forest in Oregon, surrounded by impossible things, before the school year came and the season changed, and everything became ordinary again. The supernatural is the frame. The twins are the point. And every hidden story I've told you tonight, Stan's 30-year lie, Ford's betrayal, McGucket's grief, Pacifica's bell, Seuss's empty chair, the journal's invisible ink, Bill's destroyed home, the Cipher hunt, the wheel in the credits, every one of them orbits the same center of gravity. Not the same question. What does it mean to belong to someone? Stan stole an identity and spent 30 years in a basement to belong to his brother again. Ford let a demon into his dreams because he desperately needed to belong to someone who understood him. McGucket erased himself because belonging to a world that contained impossible things was more than he could hold. Pacifica fought a conditioned reflex for the right to belong to a version of herself that wasn't her parents' creation. Seuss declined a wish because he already belonged to people who showed up. This show was always a show about belonging, about the summer before it ends, about the family you make out of whoever's in the room, even when the room is a tourist trap full of fraudulent exhibits and a vending machine that opens onto a doomsday portal. Now, there is a thing that happens at the very end of the series finale. In the last minutes, after the danger has passed, and the summer is over, and the twins have said their goodbyes to Wendy and Seuss and the town, where Dipper and Mabel sit in the back of the car together on the way home, and Mabel has made a new scrapbook. The summer captured in photographs and handwriting, and the particular anarchic decorative spirit that is Mabel pines at her most herself. And she gives it to Dipper. It is the same thing she will use to bring Stan's memories back. The scrapbook is the show's true magical artifact, not the journals, not the portal, not any of the supernatural apparatus. The record of the summer, made with love and glitter and the understanding that some things need to be preserved against forgetting, that is the most powerful thing in Gravity Falls. It defeats Bill's damage. It restores what was lost. It carries more weight than a memory-erasing gun, more permanence than a portal to another dimension, more truth than any cipher ever written in the margins of any show. That is the show's final argument. Not that the mysteries matter, though they do. Not that the codes reward attention, though they do. The final argument is that the people you love matter more than all of it. That the record of a summer, badly photographed and enthusiastically captioned and full of inside jokes that only make sense to the people who lived through them, is worth more than anything a brilliant mind can build or a demon can threaten. And the reason it lands is because Hirsch spent 2 full seasons earning it. Not he spent 2 seasons showing you the cost of getting that balance wrong. Ford, who chose the work over the people. Stan, who couldn't say what he felt until it was almost too late. McGucket, who chose forgetting over carrying. Pacifica's parents, who chose legacy over love. He showed you every version of the wrong answer, so that the right answer, when it came, would feel not like sentiment, but like hard-won truth. I've been doing these Gravity Falls videos for a while now, and the thing that keeps bringing me back to this show, the thing that makes it worth sitting with in the dark and talking about at length, is that it was made by someone who was genuinely trying to tell children something true. Not teach them a lesson. Kids can smell lessons from a mile away, and they close up the moment they sense one coming. But he was trying to give them stories that would grow with them. Stories that would mean something different at 8 and at 16 and at 25. Hiding the hard stuff in the framework of the fun stuff so that whoever was ready for the hard stuff could find it, and whoever wasn't yet was still being taken care of. That's an act of tremendous respect for an audience that is often condescended to. That's what it looks like when you trust people, when you trust kids, specifically, with more than entertainment. Wherever you are right now, whatever brought you to this video, whatever you were hoping to find in it, I hope it gave you something. I hope the woods feel a little warmer. I hope you remember what it felt like to watch this show for the first time. And I hope you also understand a little better. Now all the things that were already there, waiting for you to be ready. I hope you sleep well tonight, and when you dream, I hope it's something good. Reality is an illusion. The universe is a hologram. Buy gold. Just kidding. But not about the sleeping well part. Thank you for being here. If you made it all the way to the end of this one, if you spent these hours with me out here in the pines, please like the video and subscribe if you haven't. It's free, it helps more than you know, and it keeps this weird little community alive. Leave a comment too. Tell me which story hit you the hardest, or which detail you'd never noticed before, or just tell me where you're watching from and what time it is. I love knowing. I genuinely love knowing. Good night, sleep well, and remember, somewhere in the woods of Oregon, there is a yellow stone statue with one closed eye and an outstretched hand. Don't shake it.